Hello everyone, welcome to my vulnerable populations presentation. My name is Matt Fielding, and the population that I chose is those who misuse, abuse, or are addicted to prescription drugs. And in this presentation we'll be looking at health concerns that are associated with this population. As I mentioned, this population includes those who take, misuse, abuse, or are addicted to prescription drugs. Psychotherapeutic drugs are some of the most commonly misused. This includes antidepressants. Benzodiazepines is another big example with abuse potential. And just to define a couple terms really quick, misuse is using the drug to treat a certain symptom, whether that be pain or anxiety. It is using the drug with the purpose to treat a symptom, to try to solve that. Abuse is using the drug to try to elicit a certain feeling from that drug, such as a high or a relaxed feeling, such as with benzodiazepines. And then addiction, of course, is physical need for the drug to be able to function at a normal level. And so we will be looking at this population a little closer. The demographic most at risk are those with mental illnesses and substance abuse disorders. Often these go hand in hand, and that's what's called a dual diagnosis, where they have a substance abuse problem, and then later they're also found to have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or anxiety. And so we'll look a little bit further into that. The size of the population, these numbers, at least at a local and state level, were a little hard to find for prescription drugs alone, because often it includes the opioid numbers in there as well, and so it's hard to kind of separate that out. I did my best. I thought it was interesting that within opioid overdoses, 73.3% of people first had a substance abuse problem. So that's kind of where the prescription drugs tie in, because it can kind of be a gateway into further problems down the line. And then according to the NIH, 16.1 million people in the United States, which is kind of an astonishing 5.8% among people over 20, reported misusing psychotherapeutic drugs. That's the biggest class that is misused. So it's hard to compare these numbers, but I'm working with what I'm able to find. It's hard to distinguish the two. Within this population, there are a couple social determinants of health that are barriers for this population, and that includes healthcare access and quality, as well as social and community context. And then in the next couple slides, we're going to take a closer look at these. Healthcare access and quality is the largest concern for this population. Mainly because it involves receiving treatment, having mental health resources and access to those, as well as communication and lack of education from a provider and doctor standpoint, and not understanding the orders correctly. So the goals of Healthy People 2030 are to increase the proportion of those with the substance abuse disorder to receive treatment in the last year, as well as increasing communication with providers in order to correct that education deficit, as well. And with the social and community context, this really comes down to communication with other people about health topics. Sometimes mental illness, substance abuse, these are taboo, heavily stigmatized topics that people don't like to discuss, and so the goal of Healthy People 2030 is to increase health literacy and talking about others with health topics and being more open. Some of the root causes, according to Harris House, which is a recovery facility, trauma has been found to be the most significant root cause behind substance abuse, whether that be physical, emotional, sexual, some sort of trauma. PTSD has been heavily linked to substance misuse, abuse, and like I said, it most often starts with the prescription drugs. And so The answer is a little bit different for prescription misuse and abuse. They might be someone might be seeking to treat their anxiety, and because they just feel panicked all the time. And that is a different motive from somebody who would use that same drug because they just want to feel relaxed all the time and feel that high that way. And so sometimes this population might feel the need to misuse their prescriptions in order to manage, their pain, their anxiety, mental illness, and as well as the symptoms that they are experiencing that might be unmanaged because of, an incorrect medication or something like that. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for this population, many of the physical needs are met. Sometimes, for example, housing. If someone is homeless, that can cause a lot of stress and induce that type of trauma response, and so that can be a source if that is unmet. However, most of these needs along the Maslow triangle are within the safety level and above, so belonging, love, self-esteem, self-actualization, mental illness is tied in with a lot of those, and those are usually the unmet needs that are present. The functional level as well as the health outcomes really can range from slight to very severe, and it just depends on the level of misuse and abuse of the prescription drugs. Heavy misuse or heavy abuse or misuse can result in overdoses, chronic illnesses, hospital trips, which is a big financial burden and can increase stress. And if it's not causing something that severe, it might cause something like familial problems at home and strained relationships. Some of the specific concerns, for example, with communicable diseases, just one example of the side effects causing, an infection. Somebody takes too much of their Xanax, they sleep heavily. Xanax it's a CNS depressant, and so it can cause depressed breathing. If that goes on for long, that can result in atelectasis, buildup of fluid, poor ventilation, and that person could end up with pneumonia, and that could be a source of that, kind of an indirect relationship there. And then also there is the potential for bloodborne illnesses because within substance abuse, there's also, people might share needles with family members or strangers. So this is more of a concern with illicit drug use, but it still can happen because some prescription drugs are given, intravenously or are injectables, and so of course that can still be passed on. For example, HIV, Hep B and C, TB, and according to an article that I read, most of the time it's not necessarily needle use. It is sharing personal possessions and then having unprotected sexual activity, and that's how a lot of these diseases are transmitted. For non-communicable diseases, the issue is that a lot of these prescriptions are given for these types of non-communicable diseases, such as hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, anxiety, depression, and those are what the prescription is aimed at treating. But there are other diseases that can be caused by prescription abuse, such as like stimulants such as Adderall or other amphetamines. This can cause hypertensive crisis, organ damage from that crisis. And then other examples can include cardiovascular disease, cancer, lung disease, mental disorders. We've talked a lot about that already. The biggest potential for self-harm comes from using psychotherapeutic drugs in suicide attempts. benzodiazepines have a large abuse potential, and so it is possible that many people use this along with others to try to commit suicide. So overdose is a really serious concern. And like we've talked about, prescription drug misuse and abuse is often the predecessor and kind of the gateway into harder drugs, opioids, other illicit substances down the line. Prescription drugs is kind of where it starts. There is, potential harm to others depending on the drug. Stimulants can really pump somebody up and might cause them to be violent with somebody else. Drugs that will relax you can cause you to neglect your children. It can, if you are an expecting mother and you take some of these drugs, you can cause some serious damage to your unborn child. As we talked about, family issues can be a problem and strained relationships. Driving while intoxicated with some of these drugs can cause accidents, which is a serious problem, and that also increases cost to society. And these are my references, and thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope that you were able to learn something.